Camera, light, action. In this video, I'll be showing you at least 7 different Lightroom tips that have massively upped my photo editing game. Yo, hvað er að frétta? My name is Radial and I'm a photographer and a video creator from Iceland. So, welcome to yet another video. I'm gonna break this video down into 2 parts. So first I'm gonna talk about a few different tools and things that I use on all of my photos. And then the other part is gonna be more like stylistic choices and showing you something, I'm showing you a little bit insight into my photo game and what I'm thinking about when I'm creating these photos. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into the video. And one more thing, I have left timestamp throughout the entire video, so you can easily jump to the position of the video that interests you the most. However, if you watch the entire video, it's gonna help me out because YouTube loves watch time. So big thanks for that. Anyways, glasses is always good, so I see dirty glasses is not good, so just give me a little bit moment. Squeak. Alright, so welcome to Lightroom. The first thing that we are going to take a look at is this filter here, the graduated filter. There was a time on my YouTube career when I was trying to, speak proper English. That time is over. Like this, it's so hard, not rolling the R's. But here we have the graduated filter. So boom, click on it right now. Now, I use the graduated filter so much. For instance, this photo here, if I just take it off, you can see that I've used it here to just make the sky much more dramatic and really pull back some information in the sky. Now, let's just delete the graduated filter and we do it again. So here you have the filter, and what you do, it's basically you just drag it like this here and to create the filter. So if you have no idea what this is, basically what's happening is that now all the changes you apply, it's going to be applied from here and then gradually becoming less and less. So you can see here that if I take the exposure all the way down, like here the filter is like exposure -4 and then you gradually becoming less and less and less. But this obviously looks ridiculous. I'm just showing you what's up. So what I usually do, I have it around, let's just reset this. If you press O, you can see where it's going to take place. So to get information back in this sky and the clouds like this, I usually drag it to somewhere around here. And then what I do, I drag down the exposure a little bit. I might drag down the highlights just a tiny bit. I often might be, bring up the whites just a little bit to get a little bit oomph, although we are pretty white here. Let me see too. We can actually take it, making it like this time, not this graduated. I think this is pretty cool. Right around here. It's pretty cool. And then what I usually do, I take the dehaze and I drag the dehaze up. I think this is really where you get a lot of that oomph in this guy. I have a whole tutorial, like an old tutorial from how to make a more dramatic sky. I'll leave it up here, but we use gradient filter. So we do it like this. You can up the clarity just a tiny bit, down with the blacks, and even take the exposure down just a little bit. Like this is all just point of preference. Remember that photo editing, it's your artistic, choice or whatever. Do whatever you want to do, but do it like this. This might be a little bit too much, but for the sake of the tutorial, we do it like this. Now, this looks cool. However, you might notice that we are affecting the mountain. That's the word I'm looking for. We are affecting the mountain a whole lot. And if you press O, you can see that the filter is going over the mountain. And this is not something that I would like to do. Now, there are 2 ways to fix this. You can either go to the mask and go to luminance. And if you click range and hold in Alt on your keyboard, you can now mask out so it's not affecting the mountains. However, it's not going to affect the sky that much either now. So there is another way that I prefer in these situations. So let's reset this. And then we go down to the brush. And this is fantastic. So when you're working with gradient filters, you can always brush out things that you would like not to be there, So if you click the brush, and now you have the brush tool on top of the gradient filter. And if you go to erase here, we can erase. And then you can have the auto mask on, okay? So if you press O to see what hell is happening, now we have the eraser tool. I'm pointing here, I realize that I'm showing you the screen, but the eraser tool that is here, and now we just, erase everything from the mountains. And because you have the auto mask on, you don't have to be too specific because it's going to create a mask on top of the mountain, okay? So it's going to separate that. But I recommend you take a little bit of time to make this perfect and zoom a little bit in to, make it as perfect as you want, okay? Alright, so now this is finished, and if we take a look at it now, and now you can see that we are just affecting the sky and the mountain is unaffected. And if you press H, you can like hide this here, and you can see now like this is just beautiful. And now you just have to create whatever, you know, however like epic sky you want to create, okay? So this is one way that you do gradient filter. Another way that I use it so much is also to, you know, close in on subject. So for instance, like take a look at this photo here. On this photo, I'm basically using gradient filters here in the bottom, very, very subtle, and here too, to close in a little bit more on the subject and make the foreground a little bit more, you know, dark. And I think this is a great way to create a little bit more depth to the photo by darkening the foreground just a little bit. It obviously depends on what photo you're working with, but I find myself doing this a whole lot. So that was the first tip, the gradient filter. Tip number 2 is the brush tool. So up here you can find the adjustment brush, and you just click that, and then you get up this here. If you don't know what it is, basically you can now paint on wherever you want. So let's say just right around here, and now you can make the adjustments just to this specific area. Obviously we don't do this, but you understand what I'm saying, okay? Now a setting that I often have on the brush tool is the flow. So basically if you have the flow all the way up like this, now all the settings that you apply will be made at once. So for instance, I make one painting here, we take the exposure all the way up, and you can see it's all applied at once, okay? If you have the flow to like 1, now it's going to be gradually added. So let's say the same thing, I add 1 stroke here, and then we do exposure all the way up, and you can see it didn't nearly, like it's not nearly as much exposed. But now whenever I paint, I add a little more. So that means that you can just paint on like this, and you're gradually making it more and more of the settings that you want to have. So let's delete this. And the way I often use the brush tool is just to find places that I want to emphasize more. So for instance, the mountains, I might, and I don't have the flow at 1, I usually have the flow at around, I don't know, 30, 40, 50, somewhere around that line. I just like to be able to paint again. So I want to add a little bit contrast and maybe tiny little bit of clarity to the places, to the mountain. And then I just paint it on like this, like so, and I go a few places around, you know, the mountain, okay? And this of course is different from each photo that I'm working on. Another place here, I like these, you know, these things here, the grass dunes or whatever you want to call it, and I might want to like highlight them a little bit more. Then a cool thing that I can do is if we press enter and do one more, and I can just highlight them so and start to paint them. Now, if these settings is something that you didn't like, you can always just double click on the effect and reset all the settings. So basically, take the flow a little bit more up now. I can go here. I want to like emphasize a little bit more on this one, maybe a little bit more on this one, and this one, like bring them a little bit more out, like so, and maybe this one too. And now we can just up the shadows, up the whites. I want to like a little bit clarity on them to make them pop a little bit. Maybe the contrast just a tiny bit. And let's see if the exposure goes up, and you can see how we're just gradually making them more brighter. And this tool I use so much. And I will return to how I use it later in the video, but just finding places that I think that I want to like highlight and I want to like bring out in the photo and then paint those. For instance, this photo here, you can see the subject there. I just zoomed in on the subject and then I made sure to paint the subject up and highlighted the jacket and like brought the subject more out of the photo so you can like really see it. And this I do a whole lot. So we don't have to keep it any longer. The brush tool is very straightforward. You can remember if you press O, then you can see what you're doing, and then you have the flow and everything like that. And also if you don't want to see all these dots or they're in the way, you can always press H and then you're hiding this. It's the same on all the tools. So on to the next tool. All right, so tip number 3 is the radial filter. Now for that, I'm gonna show you this photo here, and I use this also like quite a bit. So you go up here and click the radial filter and you get it. So basically what this is, you have like, let's like do it like this. You create a circle, and if you press O, now you can see that everything that is red is obviously going to be affected. So if you want to create like a super big vignette, we can do it like this, in this manner like this. You can also invert it, okay? So if you invert it like this, now you can see here that you have an inverted filter, and you can use that in your advantage as well. So how I usually use the radial filter there are a few ways, and one I'll show you a little bit later in the video, but for now I want to show you, for instance here, I think that we can make this photo a little bit, I think it's a little bit flat. So in order for me to make it a little bit more three-dimensional, I would like to open up this space here, making it a little bit brighter, okay? So a super simple way to do that is to just use this radial filter here. Now, of course, I could take the paintbrush and paint everything, but this is very fast. It's extremely fast, okay? So I can do it like this. And let's say, oh, we have all this space here, like so. And a little bit bigger. And we have it inverted, so it's inverted like this. All I have to do now is just to go up the whites a little bit. We can up the shadows a tiny bit too, opening up this place a little bit more. We can up the highlights just a tiny bit. Maybe take the clarity just a tiny bit, and then the contrast just a little bit. And already, I think we have opened up the space quite a bit. You can see the difference here to here. Okay, and as you can see on this photo, I have a few other ones here. So if, for instance, if we press this one, this is highlighting and brightening up this area. And then we have this one, and this one is darkening all this area here. So that I also use a whole lot. Now, also, one thing I think is good to know is that if this place, you didn't want to brighten up exactly this place, you want to have the sky here to be a little bit darker, you can always go to the brush. You can go to the erase exactly as in the gradient filter, and then you can just erase this place here, and now it's not affecting there, okay? In one situation that I love the radial filter is, for instance, on a photo like this here, where I want to create my own vignette. So then all I have to do is just to click on the radial filter, I drag it like this, and we find, you can have O here, so you can see what is happening, and we do it like this here. And now I'm creating my own vignette. Of course, I could go in, effects and create a vignette, but here I can place the vignette however I want. So all I have to do then, if we go down the effects here, is just to drag down the exposure, making our own vignette and closing in on the subject. We're talking about our own vignettes. Basically, I often use, the radial filter to either, create my own vignettes and closing in on subject, or I invert them and open up a specific place of the photo. So tip number 4 is a thing that I think is very, very good to have in your toolbox and in your, box of attack box. No, what I'm trying to say. And that is the spot removal tool. So basically, the spot removal tool, you're able to remove things from the photos that you don't want there. Now, this is not as powerful as in Photoshop, but removing, lens dust, or for instance, this photo here. So you can see we have houses all the way down there that I don't think are serving any purpose of the photo. So if we zoom in on them, just like so, what I can do now, if you press here, the spot removal tool, you can just click on the house, and Lightroom is gonna find this other place on the photo. You can have the opacity all the way up. It's gonna find another place on the photo that it thinks, looks good, and it removed it. So you can see it did a pretty good job. Now, if it didn't do a good job basically here, you can find another place just like so, and it's gonna put that place instead. So you can really, do it however you want. Now you have feather. I really don't have to explain so much. You have the size also, and the feather, and then the opacity, how much you want it to be. One thing I think I do have to explain though, with the brush removal tool, is you have clone and heal. So the difference between clone and heal is that cloning, then Lightroom is taking exactly this area here, exactly this area, and pasting it on top. Okay, so it's taking this area and cloning it, putting it on top. Healing, then what it's trying to do is that taking this area and trying to blend it together with this area. There are pros and cons with both, and different scenarios require either clone or, heal. You just have to find what works good for you, okay? Now, in order for this video not to be trillion hours, I'm not gonna go dive more into this. I have an very old video on the spot removal tool. It's 8 minutes, and I dive everything into spot removal tool. If that interests you, I'll link that video up here. And yeah, just have a good time. On to the, next part. So tip number 5, I at least, think that we are on the 5th tip, and we're probably gonna do more than 7. I'm feeling I'm just getting in the groove now, but it's color grading, okay? So if you go down here, to color grading, this is fantastic. I recently made a whole video where I dove, extremely deep into the color grading. I'll link that video up here, but let's do a little, crash course on it to make it a little bit simple. So basically what this is that you can add any colors that you want to the shadows, midtones, and highlights, okay? So for instance, you can either work on it like this, seeing all 3, or you can choose if you want to just do the shadows first, and then midtones, then highlights. And then you have here global. Global is basically you're pushing any color into everything, the shadows, highlights, and midtones. So it's basically just like having a filter on top of the lens. You understand? Like you have a color filter over the lens or something. I really don't use global. So for instance, here in the shadows, you can see that I introduced a whole lot of blue into the shadows. So then all I have to do is to find the color that I like. I like to have a blue tone, so you can find it here. Now you can either just click anywhere you want on the wheel, or you can go down here to hue and just scroll it like this, okay? Now all you have to do then is to find the saturation. So the saturation, the further to the middle you are, the less saturated, and the further to the edge, the more saturated. Also you can see here the saturation, you can choose how much you want it to be, okay? Very, very, very straightforward. Then you have the luminance. This is the luminance of the shadow. So you can here also manipulate how dark and how bright you want the shadows to be. Once you found a tone that you like, I think this is cool, we can keep it like this. We touch the blending and balance in a second. Then the midtones, here you can add colors to just the midtones, and you can really just choose whatever you want. I think often I have a little bit of orangey in the midtones, especially for if there is person, but for landscape I might make it a little bit different. But I wanted this photo to be pretty blue and have these cool tones, so I think I had it just around somewhere here. I think is cool. Just a little hint of it. And then the highlights. So here you have the highlights, and you can also again choose whatever color that you want and just place it in wherever you want. So we have here 215, I think is a very nice blue tone. And then you can see that this is affecting all the highlights, and we can do it like this. And for the luminance, let's keep down luminance just a tiny bit like this. And I think this is pretty cool. So what these two sliders here do, blending and balance, is also pretty simple. So blending, now let's say you want the effect to be like more extreme, you can drag it up here, and now you can see it's more dominant, the things that you did. If you went overboard and you want it to be a little bit less, you can drag it down, and now you can see it's hardly affecting the image at all. And you can see, you know, there's the huge difference the color grading has on this photo. It makes it so much colder, and just keeping that, you know, cold Icelandic scene instead of having it, you know, a little bit more warmer as it was shot. So I think that is nice. Then you have balance. If you drag the balance more to the left, the shadows, all the changes that you did in the shadows are going to be more dominant. And if you drag it all the way to the right, the changes that you did in the highlights are going to be more dominant. And in the middle, it just sits in the middle. And now you can choose a little bit. I usually keep it, I slide the sliders a little bit and find whatever I like. That's Lightroom in a nutshell, you know, good tutorial there. Anyways, this is the color grading tab. This is a tool that I think is just fantastic. If you learn how to master this, you can really create your own feeling and vibes to the photo by pushing in colors to the shadows, midtones, and highlights, and then manipulate the photo that way. I highly recommend that this is a tool that you master. If you want to see like a more in-depth tutorial on this tool, I'll leave it in here. Anyways, on to the next tip. Now we have arrived to the second part of the tutorial, and in the first part I was more focusing on different types of tools that I use in order to, you know, create the photos and the vision that I have in my head. Now I want to show you and talk a little bit more about a few different editing styles that I use to produce my photos. And the first thing that I do now, and that I encourage you also to do, is that I declarify my photos. Declarify, sounds a little bit fun to say, but basically I drag down the clarification, the clarity sliders. What this does is it makes the overall image much more softer. And in my honest opinion, and what I think nowadays, I think this makes the photo just much better. If we were now like 2016, 2017, 2018, I would not have believed myself making a whole tutorial telling people to drag the clarity slider down. Back then, everybody was just dragging it up like this, and it was like, this is the sickest thing ever. And all of us who are into photography, and especially into Lightroom and photo editing, we've gone through a phase where we take the clarity slider and drag it all the way up and look at this and be like, sick, this is sick. It's not. I'm just telling you, it just makes the photo like, you know, digitalized, and I mean, it's too much. So nowadays, I really like to just make the clarity a little bit down, making a little more softer image. And I even do this on all my landscape photos too. Yes, all my landscape photos too. How much? Depends. From -10 to -20, I just check it out. However, if I would like to reintroduce clarity, that I also often do, to specific points of the photo, I do that with the brush tool. So now all I have to do, I want to, you know, make this part of the photo and this here, I want to like reintroduce clarity and more oomph there. So all I have to do now is just to paint here, paint this. I'm obviously doing this a little bit quick for the like tutorial sakes, but then I would do it like this and we reintroduce clarity, making this part of the photo really shine and come out. The other parts become a little bit more soft, and in my honest opinion, I think that this look is fantastic, and this is something I do to all of my photos now. And if I'm working on landscape photos, like we've been working a whole lot on this landscape photo, let's just continue on that. And you can see I've declarified this quite a bit, but in the brush tool, I would go to places like specific points of interest in the photo that I want to, bring out and add the clarity there. And then I add clarities, and then we up the clarity here, making this part of the photo really stick out, and maybe some of these grass stones too. So this is something that I encourage you to do. At least check it out. I like this look a whole lot. Now the next tip, and I can't remember what number we are on, but probably more than 7 now. And this is something that applies to landscape photos, and it's a tip that I think is fantastic, and I learned it from my friend Thráinn Kolbensson, who is a fantastic landscape photographer and adventure photographer from Iceland. And that is to use the brush tool to desaturate mountains. When you are photographing mountains, they often have all sorts of weird looking colors that not necessarily that nice for the photos. And I just was talking to him and he said like, yeah, I often take and desaturate the mountains a little bit, because they often in a mountain there might be some grass and some this and some that, and then you have all these different types of colors. So instead, just go to the adjustment brush here, and you can see that I've already done this on this photo here. You can have it here, and if I delete this, we can reset all here, and you can see now that on this photo the mountain is like there are a few different colors within the mountain. But what I did then, I just took here and I desaturated a little bit, desaturated a little bit here. So basically it's with the brush tool again. You can go, and if you press O here, see what I've done here. Does not have to be really perfect, and then all you have to do is to just desaturate it a tiny bit. How much you want to desaturate it, totally up to you. This is again just this is your artistic expression, but this is a little tip that I think I really like. This tip. This is something that I think I've enhanced my landscape photos a whole lot. Now the next tip I want to show you, and this might be the last tip because this video is probably like way too long, and that is to introduce a light source with radial filter. And this I use so much, and I think it's fantastic. Like, I'm giving you away the best tips that I have, and look at this. So take the radial filter, and what I do here, you can see I've already done it here. Let's delete it. So what I do, let's have this a little bit smaller. I make a radial filter somewhere that I feel that like, where was the light coming? So I look at the photo and I know that here, the sun was here, okay? The sun was over here and it's shining to the church. Now I want to emphasize a little bit of that light source to, the church. So what I do then, I take a radial filter, I invert it, okay? So it's inverted like this. And then I take down the dehaze and I drag the dehaze down a little bit. And you can see how this becomes like this, okay? Now, obviously this is too much, but just a tiny bit, and I think it's just fantastic. And you can drag it down or up or whatever you want. If you want, you can also up the exposure a little bit, depends on the photo. And sometimes even, I up the temperature a little bit, making it look like this is real sunlight coming through, so making it more orange. It all depends on what photo I'm working with at a given time. And often, when I take down the dehaze, I take down the clarity just a tiny bit, making this light a little bit softer. And I use this on so many photos. Instance, this photo here, this is a fantastic photo. I'm very happy with the photo. I printed this photo the other day. It's gonna hang over here. I'm gonna put prints there, and it looked sick on paper. It looked sick. But here, this was a sunset, a beautiful sunset in eastern Iceland. And it was very hazy in here, but I emphasized that haze. So you can see here, take the radial filter, we drag it like this here, just like so. We invert it and take down O, and then just a tiny bit of dehaze, really emphasizing a little bit on that light source that is coming there. If you want to make this more yellow, we can do that, or whatever. The tools are in your hands, and you can do whatever you want with it. And take down the clarity just a little bit. And you see, the more, this is going to be more like this or less. So this tape I think is absolutely fantastic, and I use it on so many different photos. If there is a natural light source coming, even if there is not a natural light source, I might use this to fake a light source coming in somewhere. Anyways, I have I honestly have lots more tips that I can talk about, but I'm gonna save that for future videos. If you want me to do more of these tips, I can do that. There are a few more things that I know that I can do right off the bat. If you could smack that like button for me, it really helps me out. Consider subscribing because, you know, I create bunch of videos. Now, this was extremely fun. I think I've been filming for 55 minutes, but I'm probably gonna chop this down to around 20-ish, maybe a little bit more, depending on, you know, depending on how this all went. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask and comment down below. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. I'm out. Peace!